Ground beef now costs almost double what it did just a few years ago. Most people assume that's just inflation, or drought, or bad luck. But there's another reason, and it has nothing to do with the weather. 4 companies control roughly 80% of the beef you buy at the grocery store. Some ranchers, lawmakers, and even federal investigators have a name for what they think is happening: a cartel. These 4 companies haven't been convicted of anything, but they're facing a fresh round of federal investigation, plus lawsuits from ranchers and now from some of their own retail customers over claims of price fixing and market manipulation. So how did a handful of companies end up controlling almost the entire beef supply? And why does that mean higher prices at your table? To understand that, you have to go back almost 70 years. Before the 1960s, beef moved through the supply chain as whole carcasses. Local butchers did the cutting, the packaging, all of it by hand in thousands of small shops across the country. Then meat packers figured out they could cut and box the beef themselves, right next to the slaughterhouse. It was faster, cheaper, and it crushed small operators who couldn't keep up. Government policy pushed this trend even harder. In the early 1970s, the Secretary of Agriculture told farmers point blank to get big or get out. By the late 70s, the top 4 meat processors controlled about a quarter of the market. That might sound like a lot, but compared to today, it was nothing. Through the 80s and 90s, new technology made massive processing plants even more efficient. Deregulation cleared the path for more mergers. And one by one, the smaller players got absorbed. Economists and regulators raised warnings the whole time. Nobody stopped it. Today, that same top 4 group controls more than 80% of the market. So what does that actually mean for the guy raising the cattle? To find out, you have to go to the ranch, not the store. Take a rancher running a cow-calf operation out on the plains. His cattle depend on grass, and when drought hits, that grass disappears. As of last year, well over half of all U.S. cattle were living on drought-affected land. When the grass dries up, ranchers have to buy feed instead, and that cost has exploded. What used to run $500 to $800 a year per cow can now run over $1,000. Total operating costs for these operations jumped nearly 30% in just 5 years. Faced with rising costs, many ranchers are doing the opposite of what you'd expect in a high-price market. They're selling off their herds instead of growing them. Multiply that across the country, and you get the smallest national cattle herd since 1951. Fewer cattle, tighter supply, and yet the people raising them aren't the ones benefiting.
Here's why. Ranchers don't sell directly to the big meatpacking companies. They sell to feedlots first, where cattle are fattened up before slaughter. But those feedlots price their offers based on what they expect the packers will eventually pay. And since roughly 80% of finished cattle end up at one of the same 4 companies, when those companies lower their bids, the price ripples all the way back down to the rancher. One rancher put it simply: he's a price taker, not a price setter. Meanwhile, the packers themselves have posted some of their best years ever. 2 of the big 4 reported record profits in 2022, and the gap between what ranchers were paid and what packers charged wholesale hit an all-time high around the same period, right as consumers were also paying more at the store. That kind of gap, rising on both ends while the middle keeps the difference, is exactly what triggered a Department of Justice investigation into possible illegal coordination. It's not the first time.
Ranchers filed an antitrust lawsuit against these same companies years before any of this made headlines, alleging coordinated efforts to hold cattle prices down while retail beef prices climbed. One of the 4 settled for over $80 million, without admitting any wrongdoing. None of the companies have ever been found guilty of collusion, but the pattern keeps repeating, and so does the scrutiny, including a brand new federal investigation launched just last year, prompted directly by a call from the president himself. The companies maintain they've done nothing wrong.
Industry representatives say they've actually been losing money for over 2 years thanks to record high cattle costs, and that other expenses, energy, transportation, labor, are driving prices too. And here's the strange part. Recent government data shows the price paid to ranchers has actually been rising faster than the wholesale price packers charge. So even inside the industry, nobody fully agrees on who's squeezing whom.
What's clear is that everyone downstream feels it. Independent restaurants sourcing real beef have watched wholesale costs climb more than 20% in just a couple of years, and many are eating that cost themselves rather than passing it fully on to customers, just to keep their menu affordable. Even the small, family-run processors these restaurants rely on often source part of their beef from the same Big Four, meaning almost nobody in the supply chain is fully insulated from it.
So what would actually bring prices down? Not government subsidies, according to the ranchers themselves. What's needed is more competition and enough confidence in the market for ranchers to actually expand their herds instead of shrinking them. That means more supply, which takes time, investment, and policy support. Easier access to grazing land, lower regulatory costs for smaller processors, and new markets for cattle. So, while all of this plays out in courtrooms and congressional hearings, what can you actually do about it as a shopper? A few things genuinely help. First, buying directly from local ranchers or farmers markets when you can. It cuts out several middlemen entirely, and often the price per pound ends up lower than the supermarket anyway. Second, look for cuts outside the usual ground beef and ribeye rotation. Chuck, brisket, shank, oxtail, these are usually cheaper simply because fewer people are competing for them, even though the flavor can be just as good with the right cooking method. Buying in bulk is another lever. A quarter or half a cow split with family or neighbors, or a large order from a local butcher broken into freezer portions tends to bring the per pound cost down significantly compared to buying small amounts weekly. Yes, it requires freezer space and some upfront cash, but spread out over months, the savings add up fast. Timing matters too. Grocery stores routinely discount beef that's approaching its sell-by date, and that meat is completely fine to cook same day or freeze immediately. Watching for markdown stickers, especially later in the day or toward the end of the week, can knock a real chunk off your bill without changing what you're buying at all. And pay attention to labeling. A lot of what looks like competition on the shelf, different brand names, different packaging, different price points, is processed by the same handful of companies we've been talking about this whole video. Store brands in particular are frequently made in the exact same plants as the pricier name brand product next to it. Comparing price per pound rather than trusting the label can save more than people expect. None of this fixes the bigger structural problem. Consolidation, drought, rising feed costs, ongoing investigations, those are playing out at a scale way beyond any individual shopping trip. But used together, these habits can meaningfully soften how much of that squeeze actually lands on your own grocery bill, while the larger fight over the market keeps playing out.